Part III of Cratylus by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Hermogenes. But why should we not discuss another kind of gods, the sun, moon, stars, earth, ether, air, fire, water, the seasons, and the year? Socrates. You impose a great many tasks upon me. Still, if you wish, I will not refuse. Hermogenes. You will oblige me. Socrates. How would you have me begin? Shall I take first of all him whom you mentioned first, the sun? Hermogenes. Very good. Socrates. The origin of the sun will probably be clearer in the Doric form, for the Dorians call him Halios, and this name is given to him because when he rises he gathers halizoi, men together, or because he is always rolling in his course ai, elein, eon, about the earth, or from aiolin, of which the meaning is the same as poikilein, to variegate, because he variegates the productions of the earth. Hermogenes. But what is Selene, the moon? Socrates. That name is rather unfortunate for Anaxagoras. Hermogenes. How so? Socrates. The word seems to forestall his recent discovery that the moon receives her light from the sun. Hermogenes. Why do you say so? Socrates. The two words, selos, brightness, and phos, light, have much the same meaning? Hermogenes. Yes. Socrates. This light about the moon is always new, neon, and always old, henon, if the disciples of Anaxagoras say truly. For the sun in his revolution always adds new light, and there is the old light of the previous month. Hermogenes. Very true. Socrates. The moon is not unfrequently called Selenia. Hermogenes. True. Socrates. And as she has a light which is always old and always new, henon, neon, ai, she may very properly have the name Selenon eoea, and this, when hammered into shape, becomes Selenia. Hermogenes. A real dithyrambic sort of name that, Socrates. But what do you say of the month and the stars? Socrates. Mes, month, is called from meusthai, to lessen. Because suffering diminution, the name of astra, stars, seems to be derived from astrape, which is an improvement on anastrape, signifying the upsetting of the eyes, anastrephein, oppa. Hermogenes. What do you say of pur, fire, and hudar, water? Socrates. I am at a loss how to explain pur. Either the muse of Euthyphro has deserted me, or there is some very great difficulty in the word. Please, however, to note the contrivance which I adopt whenever I am in a difficulty of this sort. Hermogenes. What is it? Socrates. I will tell you, but I should like to know first whether you can tell me what is the meaning of the word pur. Hermogenes. Indeed, I cannot. Socrates. Shall I tell you what I suspect to be the true explanation of this and several other words? My belief is that they are of foreign origin, for the Hellenes, especially those who were under the dominion of the barbarians, often borrowed from them. Hermogenes. What is the inference? Socrates. Why, you know that any one who seeks to demonstrate the fitness of these names according to the Hellenic language, and not according to the language from which the words are derived, is rather likely to be at fault. Hermogenes. Yes, certainly. Socrates. Well then, consider whether this pur is not foreign. For the word is not easily brought into relation with the Hellenic tongue, and the Phrygians may be observed to have the same word slightly changed, just as they have hudar, water, and kunes, dogs, and many other words. Hermogenes. That is true. Socrates. any violent interpretations of the words should be avoided, for something to say about them may easily be found. And thus I get rid of pur and hudar. Air, Hermogenes, may be explained as the element which raises, aere, things from the earth, or as ever flowing, aere, or because the flux of the air is wind, and the poets call the winds air blasts, aitai. He who uses the term may mean, so to speak, air flux, aitorun, in the sense of wind flux, pneumatorun, and because this moving wind may be expressed by either term, he employs the word air. Aer equals aites rhea. Aether, ether, I should interpret as aether. This may be correctly said, because this element is always running in a flux about the air. Ai, the, peri, ton, era, rheon. The meaning of the word ge, earth, comes out better when in the form of Gaia, for the earth may be truly called mother. Gaia, genetera. As in the language of Homer, gegasi means gegenesthai. Hermogenes. Good. Socrates. What shall we take next? Hermogenes. There are auri, the seasons, and the two names of the year, eniautos and etos. Socrates. The auri should be spelt in the old Attic way if you desire to know the probable truth about them. They are rightly called horai, because they divide horizusin, the summers and winters, and winds, and the fruits of the earth. The words eniautos and etos appear to be the same, that which brings to light the plants and growths of the earth in their turn, and passes them in review within itself. En heota exetase. This is broken up into two words, enautos from en heota, and etos from etase. Just as the original name of Zeus was divided into Zena and Dia, and the whole proposition means that this power of reviewing from within is one, but has two names. Two words, etos and eniautos, being thus formed out of a single proposition. Hermogenes. Indeed, Socrates, you make surprising progress. Socrates. I am run away with. Hermogenes. Very true. Socrates. But am not yet at my utmost speed. Hermogenes. I should like very much to know, in the next place, how you would explain the virtues. What principle of correctness is there in those charming words, wisdom, understanding, justice, and the rest of them? Socrates. That is a tremendous class of names which you are disinterring. Still, as I have put on the lion's skin, I must not be faint of heart, and I suppose that I must consider the meaning of wisdom, phronesis, and understanding, sunesis, and judgment, nome, and knowledge, episteme, and all those other charming words, as you call them. Hermogenes. Surely we must not leave off until we find out their meaning. Socrates. By the dog of Egypt, I have not a bad notion which came into my head only this moment. I believe that the primeval givers of names were undoubtedly like too many of our modern philosophers, who, in their search after the nature of things, are always getting dizzy from constantly going round and round, and then they imagine that the world is going round and round, and moving in all directions, and this appearance, which arises out of their own internal condition, they suppose to be a reality of nature. They think that there is nothing stable or permanent, but only flux and motion, and that the world is always full of every sort of motion and change. The consideration of the whole class of names which I have mentioned has led me into making this reflection. Hermogenes. How so, Socrates? Socrates. Perhaps you did not observe that in the names which have been just cited, the motion or flux or generation of things is most surely indicated. Hermogenes. No, indeed, I never thought of it. Soc. Take the first of those which you mentioned. Clearly that is a name indicative of motion. Her. What was the name? Soc. Phronesis, wisdom, which may signify phoras, kairou, noesis, perception of motion and flux, or perhaps phoras, onesis, the blessing of motion, but is at any rate connected with pheresai, motion. Name, judgment, again, certainly implies the ponderation or consideration, namesis, of generation, for to ponder is the same as to consider. Or, if you would rather, here is noesis, the very word just now mentioned, which is neu hesis, the desire of the new. The word neos implies that the world is always in process of creation. The giver of the name wanted to express this longing of the soul, for the original name was neoesis, and not noesis, but eta took the place of a double epsilon. The word sophrosune is the salvation (soteria) of that wisdom (phronesis) which we were just now considering. Episteme, knowledge, is akin to this, and indicates that the soul which is good for anything follows hepetai, the motion of things, neither anticipating them nor falling behind them. Wherefore the word should rather be read as epistemene, inserting N. Sunesis, understanding, may be regarded in like manner as a kind of conclusion. The word is derived from sunianai, to go along with, and, like epistasthai, to know, implies the progression of the soul in company with the nature of things. Sophia, wisdom, is very dark, and appears not to be of native growth. The meaning is, touching the motion or stream of things. You must remember that the poets, when they speak of the commencement of any rapid motion, often use the word esuthe, he rushed. And there was a famous Lacedaemonian who was named Sus, rush, for by this word the Lacedaemonians signify rapid motion, and the touching epaphe of motion is expressed by Sophia, for all things are supposed to be in motion. Good, agathon, is the name which is given to the admirable (agasta) in nature, for although all things move, still there are degrees of motion. Some are swifter, some slower, but there are some things which are admirable for their swiftness, and this admirable part of nature is called agathon. Dikaiosune, justice, is clearly dikaiou sunesis, understanding of the just, but the actual word dikaion is more difficult. Men are only agreed to a certain extent about justice, and then they begin to disagree. For those who suppose all things to be in motion conceive the greater part of nature to be a mere receptacle, and they say that there is a penetrating power which passes through all this, and is the instrument of creation in all, and is the subtlest and swiftest element. For if it were not the subtlest, and a power which none can keep out, and also the swiftest, passing by other things as if they were standing still, it could not penetrate through the moving universe. And this element which superintends all things and pierces (diaion) all is rightly called dikaion. The letter kappa is only added for the sake of euphony. Thus far, as I was saying, there is a general agreement about the nature of justice. But I, Hermogenes, being an enthusiastic disciple, have been told in a mystery that the justice of which I am speaking is also the cause of the world. Now a cause is that because of which anything is created, and some one comes and whispers in my ear that justice is rightly so called, because partaking of the nature of the cause, and I begin, after hearing what he has said, to interrogate him gently. Well, my excellent friend, say I, but if all this be true, I still want to know what is justice. Thereupon they think that I ask tiresome questions, and am leaping over the barriers, and have been already sufficiently answered, and they try to satisfy me with one derivation after another, and at length they quarrel. For one of them says that justice is the sun, and that he and none other, with his penetrating diaianta and burning kaanta force, is the guardian of nature. And when I joyfully repeat this beautiful notion, I am answered by the satirical remark, "What, is there no justice in the world when the sun is down?" And when I earnestly beg my questioner to tell me his own honest opinion, he says, "Fire in the abstract," but this is not very intelligible. Another says, "No, not fire in the abstract, but the abstraction of heat in the fire." Another man professes to laugh at all this, and says, as Anaxagoras says, that justice is mind, for mind, as they say, has absolute power, and mixes with nothing, and orders all things, and passes through all things. At last, my friend, I find myself in far greater perplexity about the nature of justice than I was before I began to learn. But still I am of opinion that the name which has led me into this digression was given to justice for the reasons which I have mentioned. Hermogenes. I think, Socrates, that you are not improvising now. You must have heard this from some one else. Socrates. And not the rest? Hermogenes. Hardly. Socrates. Well, then, let me go on in the hope of making you believe in the originality of the rest. What remains after justice? I do not think that we have as yet discussed courage. Andrea. Injustice. Adichia, which is obviously nothing more than a hindrance to the penetrating principle, diaiantos, need not be considered. Well, then, the name of Andrea seems to imply a battle. This battle is in the world of existence, and, according to the doctrine of flux, is only the counterflux, enantia proe. If you extract the delta from Andrea, the name at once signifies the thing, and you may clearly understand that Andrea is not the stream opposed to every stream, but only to that which is contrary to justice, for otherwise courage would not have been praised. The words arein, male, and aner, man, also contain a similar allusion to the same principle of the upward flux. Te ana proe. Gune, woman, I suspect to be the same word as gone, birth. Thelu, female, appears to be partly derived from thele, the teat, because the teat is like rain, and makes things flourish. Tethylene. Hermogenes. That is surely probable. Socrates. Yes, and the very word thalein, to flourish, seems to figure the growth of youth, which is swift and sudden ever, and this is expressed by the legislator in the name, which is a compound of thein, running, and halesthai, leaping. Pray observe how I gallop away when I get on smooth ground. There are a good many names, generally thought to be of importance, which have still to be explained. Hermogenes. True. Socrates. There is the meaning of the word techne, art, for example. Hermogenes. Very true. Socrates. Which may be identified with econoe, and expresses the possession of mind. You have only to take away the tau, and insert two omicrons, one between the chi and nu, and another between the nu and eta. Hermogenes. That is a very shabby etymology. Socrates. Yes, my dear friend, but then you know that the original names have been long ago buried and disguised by people sticking on and stripping off letters for the sake of euphony, and twisting and bedizening them in all sorts of ways. And time, too, may have had a share in the change. Take, for example, the word katoptron. Why is the letter rho inserted? This must surely be the addition of some one who cares nothing about the truth, but thinks only of putting the mouth into shape. and the additions are often such that at last no human being can possibly make out the original meaning of the word. Another example is the word sphinx, sphygos, which ought properly to be sphinx, phygos. And there are other examples. Hermogenes. That is quite true, Socrates. Socrates. And yet, if you are permitted to put in and pull out any letters which you please, names will be too easily made, and any name may be adapted to any object. Hermogenes. True. Socrates. Yes, that is true. And therefore a wise dictator like yourself should observe the laws of moderation and probability. Hermogenes. Such is my desire. Socrates. And mine too, Hermogenes. But do not be too much of a precision, or you will unnerve me of my strength. When you have allowed me to add mechane, contrivance, to techne, art, I shall be at the top of my bent, for I conceive mechane to be a sign of great accomplishment. Anein. For mekos has the meaning of greatness, and these two, mekos and anein, make up the word mechane. But, as I was saying, being now at the top of my bent, I should like to consider the meaning of the two words arete, virtue, and kakia, vice. Arete I do not as yet understand, but kakia is transparent, and agrees with the principles which preceded. For all things being in flux, ionton, kakia is kakos ion, going badly. And this evil motion when existing in the soul has the general name of kakia, or vice, specially appropriated to it. The meaning of kakos ianai may be further illustrated by the use of delia, cowardice, which ought to have come after Andrea, but was forgotten, and, as I fear, is not the only word which has been passed over. Delia signifies that the soul is bound with a strong chain, desmos, for lion means strength, and therefore delia expresses the greatest and strongest bond of the soul. And aporia, difficulty, is an evil of the same nature, from alpha, not, and porolesthai, to go, like anything else which is an impediment to motion and movement. Then the word kakia appears to mean kakos ianai, or going badly, or limping and halting, of which the consequence is that the soul becomes filled with vice. And if kakia is the name of this sort of thing, arete will be the opposite of it, signifying in the first place ease of motion, then that the stream of the good soul is unimpeded, and has therefore the attribute of ever flowing without let or hindrance, and is therefore called arete, or more correctly, airete, ever flowing, and may perhaps have had another form, hairete, eligible, indicating that nothing is more eligible than virtue, and this has been hammered into arete. I dare say that you will deem this to be another invention of mine, but I think that if the previous word kakia was right, then arete is also right. Hermogenes. But what is the meaning of kakon, which has played so great a part in your previous discourse? Socrates. That is a very singular word, about which I can hardly form an opinion, and therefore I must have recourse to my ingenious device. Hermogenes. What device? Socrates. The device of a foreign origin, which I shall give to this word also. Hermogenes. Very likely you are right. But suppose that we leave these words, and endeavor to see the rationale of kalon and aiskron. Socrates. The meaning of aiskron is evident, being only ai, iskon, rhoes, always preventing from flowing, and this is in accordance with our former derivations. For the name-giver was a great enemy to stagnation of all sorts, and hence he gave the name aiskorun to that which hindered the flux, ai, iskon, run. and this is now beaten together into aiskron. Hermogenes, but what do you say of kalon? Socrates, that is more obscure, yet the form is only due to the quantity, and has been changed by altering omicron upsilon into omicron. Hermogenes, what do you mean? Socrates, this name appears to denote mind. Hermogenes, how so? Socrates, let me ask you, what is the cause why anything has a name? Is not the principle which imposes the name the cause? Hermogenes, certainly. Socrates, and must not this be the mind of gods, or of men, or of both? Hermogenes, yes. Socrates, is not mind that which called kalesan things by their names? And is not mind the beautiful kalon? Hermogenes, that is evident. Socrates, and are not the works of intelligence and mind worthy of praise? And are not other works worthy of blame? Hermogenes, certainly. Socrates, physic does the work of a physician, and carpentering does the works of a carpenter? Hermogenes, exactly. Socrates, and the principle of beauty does the works of beauty? Hermogenes, of course. Socrates, and that principle we affirm to be mind? Hermogenes, very true. Socrates, then mind is rightly called beauty because she does the works which we recognize and speak of as the beautiful? Hermogenes, that is evident. Socrates, what more names remain to us? Hermogenes, there are the words which are connected with agathon and kalon, such as symphoron and lusitelion, ophelimon, kerdalion, and their opposites. Socrates, the meaning of symphoron, expedient, I think, that you may discover for yourself by the light of the previous examples. For it is a sister word to episteme, meaning just the motion, phora, of the soul accompanying the world, and things which are done upon this principle are called symphora, or sympheronta, because they are carried round with the world. Hermogenes, that is probable. Socrates, again, kerdalion, gainful, is called from kerdos, gain. But you must alter the delta into nu if you want to get at the meaning, for this word also signifies good. But in another way, he who gave the name intended to express the power of admixture, kerenoumenon, and universal penetration in the good. In forming the word, however, he inserted a delta instead of a nu, and so made kerdos. Hermogenes, well, but what is lusitelion? Profitable. Socrates, I suppose, Hermogenes, that people do not mean by the profitable the gainful, or that which pays, lue, the retailer, but they use the word in the sense of swift. You regard the profitable lusitelion as that which, being the swiftest thing in existence, allows of no stay in things, and no pause or end of motion, but always, if there begins to be any end, lets things go again, lue, and makes motion immortal and unceasing. And in this point of view, as appears to me, the good is happily denominated lusitelion, being that which looses, luon, the end, telos, of motion. Ophelimon, the advantageous, is derived from ophelin, meaning that which creates and increases. This latter is a common Homeric word, and has a foreign character. Hermogenes, and what do you say of their opposites? Socrates, of such as are mere negatives, I hardly think that I need speak. Hermogenes, which are they? Socrates, the words axymphoron, inexpedient, anopheles, unprofitable, alusiteles, unadvantageous, acerdes, ungainful. Hermogenes, true. Socrates, I would rather take the words blabberon, harmful, semiodes, hurtful. Hermogenes, good. Socrates, the word blabberon is that which is said to hinder or harm, blaptein, the stream. hrun. Blapton is bulomenon haptein, seeking to hold or bind, for haptein is the same as dein, and dein is always a term of censure. Bulomenon haptein run, wanting to bind the stream, would properly be bulapterun, and this, as I imagine, is improved into blaberon. Hermogenes, you bring out curious results, Socrates, in the use of names, and when I hear the word bulapterun, I cannot help imagining that you are making your mouth into a flute, and puffing away at some prelude to Athene. Socrates, that is the fault of the makers of the name, Hermogenes, not mine. Hermogenes, very true. But what is the derivation of Semiades? Socrates, what is the meaning of Semiades? Let me remark, Hermogenes, how right I was in saying that great changes are made in the meaning of words by putting in and pulling out letters. Even a very slight permutation will sometimes give an entirely opposite sense. I may instance the word deon, which occurs to me at the moment, and reminds me of what I was going to say to you, that the fine, fashionable language of modern times has twisted and disguised and entirely altered the original meaning both of deon and also of Semiades, which in the old language is clearly indicated. Hermogenes, what do you mean? Socrates, I will try to explain. You are aware that our forefathers loved the sounds iota and delta, especially the women, who are most conservative of the ancient language. But now they change iota into eta or epsilon, and delta into zeta. This is supposed to increase the grandeur of the sound. Hermogenes, how do you mean? Socrates, for example, in very ancient times they called the day either himera or hemera, which is called by us hemera. Hermogenes, that is true. Socrates, do you observe that only the ancient form shows the intention of the giver of the name? Of which the reason is that men long for himerusy, and love the light which comes after the darkness, and is therefore called himera from himeros, desire. Hermogenes, clearly. Socrates, but now the name is so travestied that you cannot tell the meaning, although there are some who imagine the day to be called hemera, because it makes things gentle, hemera. Hermogenes, such is my view. Socrates, and do you know that the ancients said duogon and not zeugon? Hermogenes, they did so. Socrates, and zeugon, yoke, has no meaning. It ought to be duogon, which word expresses the binding of two together, duein, agage, for the purpose of drawing. This has been changed into zeugon, and there are many other examples of similar changes. Hermogenes, there are. Socrates, proceeding in the same train of thought, I may remark that the word deon, obligation, has a meaning which is the opposite of all the other appellations of good. For deon is here a species of good, and is, nevertheless, the chain, desmos, or hinderer of motion, and therefore own brother of blaberon. Hermogenes, yes, Socrates, that is quite plain. Socrates, not if you restore the ancient form, which is more likely to be the correct one, and read dion instead of deon. If you convert the epsilon into an iota after the old fashion, this word will then agree with other words meaning good, for dion, not deon, signifies the good, and is a term of praise, and the author of names has not contradicted himself, but in all these various appellations, deon, obligatory, ophelemon, advantageous, lusitellun, profitable, kerdaleon, gainful, agathon, good, symphoron, expedient, elporon, plenteous, the same conception is implied of the ordering or all-pervading principle which is praised, and the restraining and binding principle which is censured. And this is further illustrated by the word Semiades, hurtful, which if the zeta is only changed into A as in the ancient language, becomes demiodes. And this name, as you will perceive, is given to that which binds motion, δοῦντι ion. And of Part III. of Cratylus. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.